So welcome to our masterclass. This is actually the May masterclass, but we've just kind of slipped it into June because Natalie was away for a while, and so it's great that you could all join us here tonight. We have hundreds of people who've signed up for this particular masterclass, and the topic is designing for water resilience. Before I introduce our guest for today, I did just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting with you today. I'm here on the land of the Gubbi people, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And what I always like to do in these sessions too is invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, where you're from, and if you're aware of who the traditional custodians of the land on which you're seated, to also put that into the chat too. And I wanted to just to mention as well that the Indigenous people of Australia have, it's been discovered recently that they actually have one of the oldest human-made structures on this planet, and it is a water system. It's about designing for water resilience in the landscape. And I'm going to put that into the chat, a link to that particular structure at a place called, I can hardly say it, but it's Brewarrina, New South Wales. And it's a set of fish traps and stone walls and a way of slowing down and sinking water into the landscape and redirecting water so that the fish could be caught, and it just made fishing easy. So this whole kind of concept of designing for water resilience is not something new. It is ancient knowledge. And I think one of the reasons why I think the work that Natalie Topa does is so powerful is that she's had the chance to see some incredible traditional practices in many parts of the world and has spent a lot of time researching this around the world. So Natalie is a regenerative and circular designer and educator. She's worked extensively throughout Africa. She's actually sitting in Nairobi right at this moment as we're here with her. Where she's based. She's worked in across Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. And so also her work has been particularly in extreme situations, places where the lack of water or too much water is a major issue, and often been working in communities that have been affected by forced displacement. So I think what Natalie does too is connecting permaculture with agroecology, with seed sovereignty, with soil regeneration. She's studied a lot with Vandana Shiva also over at the Earth University, and worked with many people around the world exploring and practicing. She's very hands-on. So what you're going to see today is actually something that you've not seen before, no one's seen before. This is a brand new presentation that she's never presented anywhere else. And it's so much of a compilation of her work in designing for water resilience. I'm just going to make sure I'm turning you on before I open. Can you turn your mic on, or you've turned it on yourself? I don't even need to do that. You're there, you're done. So also, I just wanted to point out too that Natalie and I did meet together in Nairobi. She very kindly invited me to come and stay at her place, and we just, I don't think we stopped talking for the entire time that we were there. And we made a film together, a little film about her balcony garden, which I linked into this, into the information that I sent out. And so I hope you had a chance to watch that. It's a wonderful film showing what's possible with permaculture in a small space. And it's absolutely inspirational. So welcome, Natalie. It's so great to have you here. Thank you very much for taking the time to present this to us. And what I would like to ask everyone is that Natalie has a lot of content to share with us. And at the end, we're going to have space for a conversation. You can feel free to open your mic and ask questions directly. We can have a conversation about it. Or if you want to, you can be keeping track of your questions in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye out for those as well. But we won't be answering questions throughout because it's kind of hard to present and answer questions simultaneously. So we'll just hand the mic over now to Natalie and welcome you here to the Permaculture Education Masterclass series. Thank you, Natalie.
Great, thank you, Morag. And thanks everyone for making the time to come and listen to this story today. As Morag mentioned, I'm sitting here in Nairobi, Kenya. This is where I have been based in East Africa for 17 years. But I've actually been working in extreme conditions and disasters and forest displacement for over 20 years, starting with work that I did with FEMA and Homeland Security during hurricane disaster response in Florida, starting with 2004. I've worked in the private sector, the public sector, and very much so with international NGOs directly as a staff person for the last more than a decade and a half. I am now working as an independent consultant and continuing to support UN agencies and international NGOs that are focusing on building resilience of people in forced displacement. So I'm going to walk us through a story of the work that I have been leading in South Sudan for the since last year, funded in part and mainly by USAID and the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance through a program called CARB, or Complementary Action for Resilience Building. And I've been hired. Well, I was recently for 4.5 years, I was with the Danish Refugee Council as a full-time staff person. I was the global advisor for regenerative resilience and circular bioeconomy, but I left to take a break, but I continued to support DRC as a consultant. And so the work that I'm going to present now is work that has been done through continued assignments with DRC in South Sudan. So I first came to East Africa in 2005 to work on post-war town planning and reconstruction in South Sudan. My background is urban and regional planning with a focus on economic development. After the peace agreement was signed in 2005, I came to work on town planning and working with technical staff from the government on the establishment of 10 states. Because a huge onset of, is there a way, Morag, that I can stop getting the notification that people need to be admitted? It's a bit distracting. Anyway, so I came to work in 2005 in South Sudan, and I lived there for 4 years, all the way through. And at that time, we didn't have phones or roads or internet or banks. I'd sometimes have to walk around with $180,000 in my purse just until I spent that down. And, we had massive issues. South Sudan is known for flood and drought and extreme conditions throughout the country. So I don't know how to turn this off, Morag. Every second I'm getting
I'm not sure actually how to turn off those notifications. Does anyone know how to do that? The only way I know how to do it is to actually stop people from coming in.
Okay.
If you make it so that Natalie's not a co-host, she won't see them and only Morag will see them.
Will you still be able to share your screen then?
She should. She should.
Okay, let's just try. Okay, let me just try that. Thank you for that. I always appreciate help.
All right, thank you.
Let me see. Natalie, I will make you with co-host permission, and you're still sharing.
Great.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so most of the story takes place in Bentiu. Bentiu is located in Unity State in South Sudan. I don't want to go too much into the history of South Sudan and Sudan, but it used to be all one country. They are now two separate countries. And the north is known for being more sort of Arab influence and culture, whereas South Sudan is, Black African, Christian. And also this is where the Nile River passes through, which I'll get into in a moment, but it is historically a place where you have extreme weather events. So, okay, so I'm structuring this presentation first talking about resilience and what exactly do we mean by resilience. It's a hot, it's sort of a buzzword, just like regeneration and regenerative everything is becoming a buzzword, which is a bit annoying when people use it to greenwash the work that they're doing, which is sometimes degenerative. I'm going to talk a bit about the context of South Sudan and the flooding conditions in Bentiu in Unity State. I'm going to talk about some of the flood zone food systems that we are piloting, including some floating raft gardens, as well as Chinampas based on the Aztec model. And then I'm going to talk about how we've just been doing the good old-fashioned earthworks and designing gardens for more resilience in food systems. So when we talk about resilience, especially in the context where I work in forced displacement, there are many different types of vulnerabilities to different types of risks and influences. So for example, when we're working with communities and people who are in the industry of humanitarian assistance, recovery, development, you know this, but we're talking about people, resilience of people, but to what? What are they resilient from, or to what or from what are they resilient? That can be flood, drought, market disruption, food, energy, and seed insecurity, all types of extreme conditions and events, climate change and ecological degradation, social instability, and in the case of women and girls, resilient from predation and rape and violence from men. But if we go down this list, crops also need to be resilient to flood and drought and market considerations, climate change. The local ecology also needs to be resilient to these things. So do animals, so do farms. Soil needs to be resilient from drought and flood and degradation. Road systems that get washed out and market access is cut off. So markets themselves also need to be resilient. Watersheds can be resilient or vulnerable. In communities in general, women and girls, elderly, people with lesser abilities. So we always need to think about, when we're talking about resilience, who are we trying to support in resilience building, and what are those risks? I think there's some feedback. Am I unmuted now? Can you hear me? Okay, so as I was saying, what I'm going to talk about right now are purely my observations of almost 2 decades working in the context of South Sudan. When I was there in March and also in October, people are screaming about climate change, climate change, climate change. All of these problems are due to climate change, which of course is a very real and daunting thing. However, that ignores gravity, Morag, just basic gravity. So, when I was looking at the context of Bentiu that I'll show you photos of, there's so much flooding and people are blaming climate change. Yes, there are increases in weather, in rain events. They're becoming extreme. The volumes of water are either too little or too much. They come too early, too late. And so there's a lot of unpredictability. But when we talk about the flooding that's being experienced, it is not only because of climate change. And I say that because of almost 2 decades in this region working in South Sudan, I know that within the entire Nile River basin, there have been so many things happening. We have a swelling and growing middle class across East Africa. That means that cities like Kampala, Juba, Wowtown, Kwajok, all these places are getting more apartment buildings, more development, more concrete, more pavement, more asphalt, more food production, more chemical warfare farming, and so that means great, clearing of land. So all of the absorbative capacity of the bioregion and of the Nile River basin is becoming depleted. It's basic gravity. I think, Morag, in the last presentation for International Permaculture Day, I jokingly said that permaculture is an anti-gravity movement, right? We're trying to hurry up the slowing down. So what's happened here is that we're removing the sponginess of the Nile River basin. Now water, which is not supposed to be moving except through rivers and riparian corridors, is now sheeting off, it's eroding off, and it's joining with other waters, and it's all flowing in large volumes into the sump. Now that is not an accident. That is not only because of climate change. The other thing, if you look at South Sudan, since the peace agreement was signed in 2005, a huge number of changes have taken place in South Sudan. First of all, hundreds of thousands and millions of people were returning back after 50 years of war. What that meant is they need timber and tree products to build their homes. They need fuel. They're clearing land for farming. And I remember in 2007 when Louis Berger opened, we had a lot of land mines, anti-personnel mines, anti-tank mines, very, risky landscape in terms of unexploded ordnance and things like that. When the land mines were cleared and it was safe to do so, the road was built from Juba, the capital of South Sudan, to Nimule in Uganda. What that meant was that thousands and thousands of cows, cattle head, were, this is the Dinka and Nuer symbol for cattle. Those are tribes in South Sudan. You know, people in the pastoralist culture in South Sudan get married and they pay a bride price of cows. But during 50 years of war, people were getting married on credit, on cow credit. And so when the peace agreement was signed and it was safe to do so, thousands and thousands of cattle were being brought back into the country in order to pay off these large marriage debts. And so that instantly has a shock or a stress on the landscape. Like suddenly there's this onset of grazing. Plus you have donors like USAID, USAID, and China, and all these actors who are trying to come in and bring in chemical warfare farming. Why do I call it chemical warfare? Because pesticides and fertilizers all started as chemicals of war during World War II. And all of the companies that sell us those wonderful improved seeds are actually petrochemical companies who started their origin as, this chemical started as weapons of war. And now we're being told that we need to produce life-giving food with poisonous, death-giving chemicals. So it's called chemical warfare farming, and that is what donors are bringing in, and also FAO agencies that are funded by the US government, which is a machinery of petrochemicals, farm subsidies, food distribution. It's a whole machinery that needs to be addressed systemically in another presentation. But this model is being rolled out into the context of South Sudan. What that means is that soil is being assassinated by the application of these chemical poisons. Land is being cleared of trees and absorption and sponginess to hold the water in place. So I say all of this because I want people to understand that it is basic physics and gravity that when all of these things happen in the catchment of the Nile River Basin, it is inevitable that we are going to have increase of flooding in the sump of this land with or without climate change. So let me take a sip of cold coffee. Okay, so I was brought in to Bentiu, which is in Unity State, which is the northern part of South Sudan, which makes up part of the greater Upper Nile region. This is an area that's generally flat, although we know there's no such thing as flat in nature other than underwater, but it's a generally flat landscape with black cotton soil, a highly impervious clay content, which is not, a coincidence that this is also where major fossil fuel extraction is happening. This is an oil-rich area. So I was brought in because we have all of this flooding that is happening. This area does flood every year, but this is the first time since the 70s that the water has not receded, and now the new rains, the next rainy season is upon us, and all of this water has not yet subsided. So basically, in this entire area, people and their animals have had to move to higher land. And, you can say what you want about UN agencies and donors, and I'm the first to critique, but thank goodness that there are actors, there are these humanitarian actors and agencies, because when there are major crises, these are the people who respond. And here in this context, the UN and various UN agencies have been collaborating with different governments and donors to create these massive dikes around the entire town of Bentiu just to keep the water at bay. And people and animals have had to crowd into this very, this context of an area that now what you're going to see through this presentation, half of the land is totally flooded and inundated, and there's so much water it can kill you. And then literally a meter away on the other side of the dike are total desiccated drought conditions. And it's so painful to be there and see both of these simultaneously at the same time. So again, when I see all these excavators, I think of all the earthworks, silverback gorillas that I've learned from, like Warren Brush and Brad Lancaster and David Spicer and Jeff Lawton and Glenn Armstrong, people that I've studied dam building and machine-based earthworks with, because it is, on one hand, very exciting to see all these huge machines in the landscape, knowing what the potential is, but they're not supposed to be down at the sump, Morag. They're supposed to be in Kampala and in Juba and higher up in the watershed. We've got to get that water to stay put higher up in the landscape. But thank goodness they are here. They're using these machines to create highly unsustainable dikes. You know, we know what's happening in Ukraine. Fuel prices are rising, and the sheer cost of these machines running all day, every day to build these dikes is unthinkable and totally unsustainable. And, you know, I think there are also political reasons. As I mentioned, this is where we have oil extraction. You have political visits happening. So anyway, but this is what's happening. You can see this all day, every day, are all these machines. So homes are flooded, people's crops are flooded, grazed land has died, right? So the grasses, I mean, now you can start to see some grasses poking up, and people are doing a bit of cut and carry and harvesting that grass for the livestock. But the situation was so dire. Here are more homes, traditional homes, more modern homes, all being totally inundated. I love this little vehicle. It's an amphibian, so it's a boat car, so you can drive straight into the water, or you can drive on land. I thought they're really cool looking, but it just speaks to the extreme of the conditions. And is this what Elon Musk is going to come with next? Is this like the new Tesla, you know, disaster mobile? I don't know, but anyway, here you have people, you know, some people are trying to make their way back to their communities with their animals to see if there's dry land and the water has subsided. They're looking for grass. You can look at the hip bones of these cows. They're totally, you know, just emaciated, and it's such a desperate situation. So many of the animals have been crowded in to this limited space, right? This limited dry land that is totally desiccated, and the water that should be washing over it is not, because it's being held back by the dikes. It was really distressing to be here. One of the lowest indicators of poverty is to see people literally just doing extraction of bush products and carrying them to market. That, however, is not to say that this is a photo of poverty. This is a traditional livelihood and activity of women collecting fuel wood, materials for building houses, for thatching. So part of it can be for their own personal use around the home. Some of it may be for market. But, you know, there is a critical mass around which this starts to create a degradation, and I'll show you photos of that as well. And I love when, you know, when we're the weaker sex, but yet we're like ants and can hold like 10 times our body weight on our head, but that's another topic. So there's major devastation in the landscape. It's so dry, and there were dead cows everywhere, Morag. We would go to lunch, you know, we're in the field, would go to lunch, and coming back from lunch, there were new dead cows on the same road we had just left. So, you know, the land is so parched, it can't even, and so hot, it can't even produce food. And it was just, I mean, I think that's, oh no, we've got a couple more dead cow photos, but just to give you a sense of how desperate. And if you look at this landscape, stump, 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 I mean, welcome to Stumpville. Like, and you know, the thing that I also want to point out is the relationship with the vegetative cover, the tree cover, and the temperatures. So, you know, we still are, you know, infants when it comes to our understanding of the interconnected systems of carbon, nutrients, hydrology. What this photo is showing is I'm literally standing in the same exact place. You know, those are my feet. And on the left side in the trunk of that tree, the temperature is 40 degrees Celsius, okay? I just reached my hand over to point on the other direction without moving my legs, and look, it's 63 degrees. That is 23 degrees higher in Celsius. So what that means is that the shade of this tree is creating the temperatures and the enabling environment for plants to grow, for soil microorganisms to thrive. But this drama over here with the 63 degrees, no way. Plants can't live there, soil can't live there. And, you know, humus comes, the word human comes from the word humus. We are soil organisms. We're just macroorganisms, okay? But we are from the soil. I love these ladies in the Katrina leash. I just love watching their reactions and laughing. So anyway, we need to understand that tree cover and deforestation has so many layers of disaster that it creates, but the temperature is what I really want to show here, because the temperature is creating drought conditions and people are blaming climate change, when if you look at the landscape, how can it not be drought ridden? So when we remove trees and biomass from the landscape, we are removing the natural air conditioning of the soil and the system that cools the temperature. If global warming is one of the main problems, so much of that is coming from the natural, physics of and chemistry of the heat exchange and gas exchange and coolness and evapotranspiration of the soils due to tree cover, okay? So here's just a little example of some of the conditions that people are living in. I think if you're a permaculture person, you're kind of excited by this photo because there's evidence that there's carbon, mulch, nitrogen, the human nutrient, animal manures. So, you kind of got to adjust your lens a little and, spit clean it off a bit. But there are the ingredients here to try to start building a system of resilience. So this is how many people grow food. I think also if you're a permy type of person, or if you focus on agroecology and conservation agriculture, you can list a number of problems with what we see here. It's a monocrop, it's desiccated, it's mulchless, it's treeless, it's designed to move water away from the plants. So anyway, this is how many people do try to grow. Here they're growing okra, which is a very nutritious and popular crop here. Pro tip, it was Cleopatra's beauty secret. She loved okra. It had great skin. So here I'm with a community and in one household where, based on a previous training that I had done, the team started to integrate some permaculture small-scale food system directly around the home of this community leader. So we did a refresher training on how to make an A-frame and how to calibrate an A-frame. We talked about soil, and as I always say, the nose knows. So here, this is Riem and Robert, and they're enjoying the wonderful fragrance of healthy living soils with all kinds of people crawling around in there. So we're just talking about the appreciation and the absorptive capacity of healthy living soils. So here, we're developing what we call a rain garden, and this is downhill from the toilet and the showering area, so water naturally passes in here. And this is not like an on contour design, with a lot of tools and engineering. It's a hole, it's a dimple. So we just made a basin and we're putting in mulch. We've been planting different trees, and it's the place where we have an enabling environment because it has the shade of this tree, that it's a nitrogenous tree, as we can see. So doing all these different systems, focusing around the edge of the compound. Here is a little banana circle for the household greywater and household food waste. So if you don't know what a banana circle is, it doesn't even have to have bananas. I've made coconut circles, but it's basically a basin filled with mulch. And you put that mulch in the center, and you can even put your greywater in there because all of that carbonaceous mulch is the food of fungi, which locks up the saponins of the soap, renders them inert so that water and moisture and fertility can just wick into the surrounding soil and feed bananas, papayas, cassava, different perennials, different annuals. So it's a little tiny micro garden. It's a little micro food forest, only from the household wastewater and food waste and compound sweepings, because oftentimes here people sweep the compound to avoid insects and snakes around the home, and then they burn that rather than returning that back into the soil. So here we are, just, Robert on the right-hand side is adding food waste, carton boxes to the center of the banana circle. You can see there's pumpkins, papaya, there's some eggplant growing. And then we're planting more trees, but some of the trees that had been previously planted were really struggling. And so we just looked around and scrapped together whatever bits and pieces to make little shade structures for the baby trees. for people who are not familiar with permaculture, we really try to emphasize locally available resources. The only input is knowledge. What we're importing is ideas, not chemicals, not plastics and things like that. So we really try to focus on the fact that all of the ingredients for resilience are right around us. So here's a little food forest demo that we're doing in the same compound of this community leader. So here we have large, well, I call them smile berms, but you can, if you're less positive, you can call them half moons or earth buns. But we call it a smile berm because it looks like a happy little smile on the earth. But these are all triangulated. They're all on contour so that each tree that we plant is has its own water harvesting structure. And by the way, that now becomes a concentration point for water and fertility. So we can have a garden around that tree. It's like a one food forest, or I don't know, one tree guild. So this is just some weeks later in that same space where different crops have been planted alongside with the trees. And especially, we're here on the lower right-hand side, just using whatever bits we could throw together, old carton boxes to protect the baby trees from the west sun, that harsh west sun. So here is something that a lot of people in East Africa overlook. We have an abundance of water hyacinth in some of these very water-rich areas. And people complain about it. They call it invasive. I think calling other species invasive is like the height of irony for humans, right, Morag? I mean, is there something more invasive than humans? We're complaining like, this weed. But anyway, this is water hyacinth that is spreading across. And I guess there are some good things that coming out of the flood is this increase in abundance of water hyacinth, which is used all over the world to clean waterways of heavy metals, and also to break down as a very, very rich compost that breaks down very quickly. So very nutrient dense. And so when I was there in October to do a training in another part of South Sudan, it was the place where we did the original training was very dry. And I knew that this place is very flooded. So I encouraged the team to try to put that hyacinth to use to make raft gardens. They did, and they started to grow a few little okras and things, but there were a number of challenges. So during my time there, what we did is create these adaptations. We adjusted the rafts. People felt they were too big because if you stand on them, they sink. So they didn't really want to they wanted to make them more maneuverable from all edges so you don't have to get onto the raft. And we used a number of different types of flotation devices underneath. The original rafts were actually staked in, but as the water level rises, you have to go and lower every raft. They're not actually buoyant. So what we did here is we took some of the original rafts out of the water. These were all with local sticks and materials. And the first thing we did, just using locally available materials, is make use of discarded plastic bottles. So we took them and we tied them, a bunch of these, onto the lower part of the raft. So to see how that would work. And of course, this is all a living laboratory. There are no promises. We're testing ideas. And see what works. So this was one approach that we had. Then we created new rafts using bamboo and really tried to strengthen them and have a better technique of tying off the ropes and just designing and engineering the raft itself. And we wanted to also add trellises, not only to increase the surface area for growing, but also to provide some shade because this is a very hot area with intense sun. So here we are lowering some of these new raft prototypes into the water, which was just a lot of fun. People had never done anything like this before, so it was very unique and a lot of bystanders and curious people. So we've got different types of trellises, different types of rafts that we want to test. Here's the plastic water bottle one going back into the water. And then they were all it was actually a really beautiful sort of convoy of people walking along the dike as people were swimming the rafts to the place where they were going to be parked. And then we're adding in different types of materials for buoyancy. So we have one raft that uses barrel drums, like 200-liter barrel drums, one raft that is using only these 20-liter jerry cans. We had another one with old tires, I think there was, I thought I had, oh yeah, you can see that she's got a tire there. So whatever we think can float, we're like, stick it under a raft and let's test it and see what happens. And then, you know, just like in a lasagna garden bed, we're doing a floating lasagna. So we have carton boxes, we're layering in manures and soil, some of the mineral rich clay soils, manure, fish waste, carton boxes, plus all of this chopped down water hyacinth. So here they're adding water hyacinth, which they've chopped very, very well. But, you know, Morag, to be honest, I just was like, I mean, I like it and it's cool, but I worry about things that are gimmicky. Like, is this really something viable that people can take up, especially because there is a security consideration here, is that if a floating food system is far away from someone's home, even the plastic bottles are of value and can be sold in the market, let alone the plastic drums or the jerry cans. And so I was scratching my head and I thought, there's all this stuff floating on top of the water. Isn't there something that can float that we can stick under the rafts? And they're like, hold my beer. And they went and got this daikon radish looking natural styrofoam. And they're like, this thing completely floats. And I was like, okay, let's try a whole new thing. And so we harvested all of this, what's called wur. The local community here are part of a Nilotic tribe called the Nuer, one of the largest in South Sudan. I won't comment on whether it's the largest or not the largest. There are other large tribes and they're in conflict, so let's just skip that. But there's this giant styrofoam stick. So we're like, why don't we harvest a bunch of these and use these as the materials that nobody wants to steal? And it floats because it's like this natural styrofoam. So here is now a truly locally made thing, right, that floats, and now with the water hyacinth can layer that on top and have some of the rafts. So right now the team is, they have seedlings that are going in that are about to be planted into the rafts. So this is still a work in progress. I'm still supporting the teams and working with them to monitor the performance of the different models and things like that. But then we also wanted to move into a pilot on Chinampas. So if anyone has been to Mexico City and seen the floating gardens of Xochimilco called Chinampas, it's an ancient way that the Aztec people were actually elevating food above the swamp waters in the form of these artificial islands. So this is right next to one of the IDP camps. IDP stands for internally displaced person. So you're not a refugee if it's in your own country, you're an IDP. So this place becomes flooded, totally flooded by about 1 meter. So this whole place will become a swamp. And so we decided that just with the roadside access and the visibility, this would be a good place to start our model. So we were out with the community and I just showed them a bunch of photos on my iPhone and they're like, we got it, let's do this. And we co-engineered, co-designed these Chinampas. So we got started, we talked about the dimensions, and at every point, you know, I was just trying to ask questions to apply some parameters. If it's too small, what about erosion? If it's too deep, what about safety? So with all of that constant feedback, we just were designing and digging and created the first Chinampa bed. And we wanted to also layer in fertility materials, right? So we had this random mystery swamp grass. They're like, yeah, this is really good. We sometimes use this. So we harvested a bunch of this kind of ferny thing, and we're applying that onto the bed, layer by layer by layer. We were also adding dried grasses and straw that we were able to find. We added fish waste, because one thing about being in a flood area is there's a lot of fish. And that fish has fish waste, which is a very valuable element and soil amendment to be adding, whether, you know, like at home here, I know Morag is aware, but I make my own biofertilizers. If it will rot, I will ferment it. I will ferment you, Morag, if you come here. So my family's Polish, right? My parents are from Poland and Ukraine. So fermentation is sort of in my blood. So we can ferment fish waste. We can ferment all kinds of even slaughter waste and apply that to soil. And so then we started to bring in reinforcements, but this is not something that everyone can do, is to afford these timbers. Plus there's the aspect of obviously the deforestation. And we had a bunch of bakers that were like vultures. They wanted this timber for their ovens to bake bread. So we know that this is not totally sustainable, but we're trying to test the engineering with different models. And we already have some learning on that. So here again, just keep layering more and more materials until finally there was a full bed, which they ended up plastering all the way around. But we also created a trellis. We've planted pumpkins and bananas and guava trees on the corners to help stabilize. So we're trying to do a deep root edge to try to stabilize from erosion. But now, I'm getting updates from the team regularly and giving them feedback. Now they've developed 3 whole Chinampas. The last one is underway. And the community really seems to like this. And then I found out from a colleague who was a senior official in the government that south of this area, there was actually a little pocket community that used to do this. So I'm trying to get more information on that to see, what we can learn from that. But already we have some learnings around the erosion. We started to slope the bottoms out, more of a beveled edge to protect from the erosion. So that's it on the Chinampas. So again, these are pilots. We're testing, trying to see not only what works from a physics and biology perspective, but from a human governance perspective. And so there's a lot of excitement around this. But for me, to be honest, the most viable option for food security in this context is still to really do bio-intensive permaculture gardens directly around the shelter. And so that's what I'm going to talk about now, is a couple of small garden. One is a smaller garden design and another one is a bigger one. And what I refer to as sponge garden, sponge watershed, sponge village, sponge camp, sponge homestead. I like sponges. So here we come to this garden. This is a drawing, by the way. This is some of the little rudimentary artwork that I've done. I got an iPad. So we came to this garden, and as you saw, they had this sort of waffle pattern that they're trying to grow on, but the soil is totally cracked. And they have all these okras, which, as you saw in the previous pictures, dry, and they're not healthy looking, and they're dusty and wilted. And so what we did is start to look at which direction does the water flow here. We also determined that by using an A-frame, but water flows from the left to the right side of the property throughout the garden. And then also the question is, where is the sun, the west sun setting, right? That's a massive factor that we need to consider when we're trying to grow crops, because that sun, especially in a dry land context, it can be so harsh that you need up to 90% shade to grow those annual crops, and that should come from trees and perennial stability. So we're looking at the direction of the sun, the water, and so what we started to do is we took an A-frame and we wanted to demonstrate different types of interventions. So we have here a tiny little food forest demo that's triangulated. So with food, little smile berms that are harvesting water for the trees. We had some rain gardens in either corner here. There was an existing tree as well. This existing tree. So then, knowing that the water flows from left to right, we created a bioswale on contour with some spillways, with some double dug garden beds. Now, why double dug? What do I mean by double dug? We took out this soil, we packed it full of carbon, carbonaceous materials, brown materials, dry leaves, grass, paper waste. And then we filled it full of green materials, which can be food waste, leafy greens, weeds, leaves from trees, manures, all of those are in the green category. And then if we have things like biochar or charcoal dust, we also add that into the bed, and then cover those beds now with soil. And what happens when we have that double dug bed of 60 to 80 centimeters, you have this deep, basically it's like a water storage tank with a garden on top. So this is now, rather than that water flowing out of the system, these are points where we're able to capture and store that water. So through these water harvesting structures, including the deep beds, that water is sinking into the ground. And then we also have an overflow plan for every water harvesting structure. So every smile berm, is designed so that the water will flow in a certain direction. The rain garden will flow into the swale. It'll go through the spillway into the other garden. So we've really created like a little tiny prison, a little cozy prison for the water. What I will say is that this is black cotton soil, and we are testing the double dug beds, but because it's clay soil, the risk is that they can become anaerobic, even though there's very, very dry conditions in the dry season. So we're also testing more of a mounded, above ground, not sunken bed, but still impregnated with all kinds of juicy good things. So now not only are we catching that water in the structure, but that seepage will infiltrate the soil around, and that will, all the land and soil around the water harvesting structures also becomes more viable for production. So, your pumpkins, your cover crops, all of the things, you have this residual moisture that's saturating and hydrating the soil around the water harvesting structure as well. So then, of course, what we did is we added a ton of mulch, and this is an ongoing thing. Like, as I'm speaking, they're still in the process of working on this. But the point is that the more we cover with mulch, we're increasing the sponge, holding absorptive capacity. We put a trellis on the swale using just bamboo sticks. And now, when you have that mulch and water flows through, all of that organic material holds and absorbs that water. And so I think with Morag, we need to not only be talking about water security, but moisture security. And the reason I say that is because, these guys met in Davos, and one of the great innovations that they're coming up with is the privatization of water. How awesome is that, right? So there are certain people in this world, according to some, that are deserving of water if they can pay for it, and everyone else is just going to have to get by somehow. So I think the biggest way that vulnerable communities can be resilient to this concept of privatizing water is to hide it through sub-irrigation. Hide it in the soils, cover it up with mulch, put a tree in front of it so they don't see it. Let it be in the soil as sub-irrigation and moisture security. That, I think, not even for vulnerable communities, for all homes, watersheds, farms, we've got to be doing sub-irrigation and protecting water resources from these people who want to concentrate it, collect it, sell it back to us. So again, the vision is that the garden beds should be planted very, very bio-intensively, so they become their own cover crop. They're planted very diversely, so you have different plants and flowers that invite predators and pest controllers and pollinators. And then, of course, the team is in the process of doing this as the rain starts, is to plant something to cover the trellis, ideally a perennial climber or a vine, but if not, we've got pumpkins and different beans. I would rather like a passion fruit or chayote or something that can be more permanent. And then, of course, the trees. So, getting that shade, focusing on the edge, creating this enabling environment, microhabitat for pollinators and pests. And then, of course, that shade and coolness for the soil, and of course, the generation of biomass in the form of leaves and things like that. So, again, now this system can become a full, rich, just a self-seeding, self-mulching, self-watering system over time, right? That is the permanence of permaculture. So this is what it actually looks like. So this was the garden of an elderly woman who was the daughter of the aunt of this woman named Yaber, who I'll mention later. But here we are making the smile berms and water harvesting structures for all the trees. We're making swales, and we really want to make sure they're done to a technical specification. So we always measure the water line. We cap the swales so that water doesn't just pour out the edges, unless that's where you want it to pour out. We always make sure that there's a freeboard, consistent freeboard across the entire swale in the berm. And then, here we just, we're retrofitting bit by bit to create all these areas where water can slow down, spread, sink into the soil, and create that water and moisture security. So this whole entire space will become sub-irrigated. And especially, we're talking about three different elements here: hydrology, geology, and we're moving the soil and doing the terraforming and earthworks and stoneworks. And we want to build healthy living soils. That's the geology aspect. The hydrology and getting that water deep into that necrosphere so it can aid in fertility. And then the biology. You can't just do this stuff and not plant stuff, right? You never want to do your earthworks without planning your planting works. So pumpkins, cover crops, crawling things, tall things, we want our gardens to be 3-dimensional and vertical. Morag, I always say the Garden of Eden was not like a 1-dimensional, field of maize that you harvest and then it's a dry, dead, acre for 6 months. No, they had trees, right? We know they had apples, they had fruit trees. It was a permanent paradise, evergreen, and it was vertical and 3-dimensional, and that's what we're trying to create. So here I am. This is what I mean by a rain garden. It's just a basin that we mulch heavily, plant a bunch of things inside or outside or around, depending on the climate and the water absorption. But you always want to have an exit point, otherwise water will make its own exit point. And so you can see if this fills up, this will be fully mulched, that water will just go straight into the swale and then it will come out this little spillway. By the way, we don't ever want to align spillways. That's too much concentrated energy in one spot. So here's mulching. And so now you can see how water is just going to be parked here. Water should be in parking lots, not in superhighways. So here we're mulching the swale. And also the berm should be mulched as well, but we're kind of limited on mulch. So baby steps. But this is the tiny little garden that we want to create a much more biodiverse, abundant system. So this is one of the double dug beds. You can see how packed full of materials. And so there's no way that even in the very end of the dry season, that won't still be totally moist. So this is when I left Bentiu, and this is just an image of showing how there's such massive inundation and full availability and abundance of water, but then look at the degradation of the land, and it's just so dry, bone dry, no life. And you don't have to be a permaculturalist for this to drive you crazy to look at this, right? It's a total mismatch of resources. That water needs to be on the soil. Anyway, okay, so I'm just going to quickly walk through another design of like a sponge homestead. And basically here, the story is that here on the right-hand side, that's a road. This is the main corridor for the community access in and out to the market. And it becomes so flooded and very dangerous. These flash floods accumulate here. And this is actually the home of the local chief. So he has his house here. There's one building here, and then his wife has a little kitchen right here that bakes in the sun all day long while she cooks with charcoal inside. And then there's a little bedroom right here. But what we, as we started to walk around and ask questions with the community to understand, what is this place? We started to understand the water flows, right? We always talk about walking the water, understanding the flows and the influences of wild energies across this landscape. So water is like pummeling right through their compound. They did build, actually, they tried to build this fence, this wall, in order to stop the flooding that was coming to the house. But there are 2 footpaths, and these are an important part of the story. There are nearby homes, these 2 footpaths that lead into a larger footpath, and they just carry water that joins here, and all that water now is go to the major road. I mean, the main road, not a major road. It's a tiny road, but it's the main road for this community. And it creates this huge amount of flooding very quickly, massive amounts of rain. And then of course, there's a sorghum field, which is totally eroded and tilled and degraded. And so that soil is loose, and they just keep tilling it and growing sorghum, and all of that water and nutrient is just passing through. So what we did, this was in October of last year, is to create a water harvesting design. So remember I talked about those 2 footpaths that come from nearby homes. The first thing we did, we always want to start as high up in the system as we have control over within our, range of influence. So for us, that was these footpaths. We created little check dams about every meter on these footpaths. We made a little stone check dam. And then where it joined with this path, we made a Zuni Bowl. I don't know if people know what a Zuni Bowl is, but it's basically like a toilet drain. You take stones in a circular spiral pattern, which I'll show you, and it's a basin with a circular spiraling pattern, because you can't ask water just to take a direct turn, right? all the silt will bottom out. So water pours in here, it sort of swishes around for a minute, kind of flushes around in there, pacifies itself, right? It's a little timeout for the water to calm down, and then it pours into the upper swale. The upper swale here is larger because it is going to be the one catching the most amount of silt and filling up. We did make a little silt trap also, but still big swale for big silt. Then that water pours over. We have double dug beds. This is actually not correct, but I drew it this way. All these spillways are lined up, but it's offset in reality. We created these little food forest demos and smile berms, all interconnected for fill and spill, and also down here. So now water, instead of heading down that pathway, will enter into this sponge farm. Into the sponge farm, and look at how much water, I don't know how much it is in liters, but we could calculate it if we needed to, but we don't right now. So all of this water is stopped, and it's reducing the amount of water that's contributing now down towards the road. If every home, every homestead, every farm did this, we would be able to reduce the extreme water events, within this community. So if everyone did it and we really created a whole sponge community, we could totally stop flooding like we did in the Burundi project. I know, Morag, you're familiar with that. But anyway, now we have all these parking lots for water. And then, of course, we want to add a lot of mulch and sponginess. We add trellises to reduce the evaporation over the swales. And then, of course, that infiltration, that deep, wicking moisture in the interstitial spaces of the soil, this entire place now becomes more moist, more infiltrated, more hydrated, and more of an enabling environment for biological uplift of your foods and biodiversity. So of course, the plan was to come in, plant very biointensively with the beds, cover the trellises with shade, and then plant out. We did plant a number of trees that are being maintained. So, and of course, now you have this whole system that's able to hold more and more water and infiltrate and stay, this is what we talk about, extending the growing season. If people are focused only on rain-fed agriculture, like many people do here in Africa, this is how you can extend the growing season. And I know, Morag, that my great friend, and he's like a brother to me, James Kagwe. If you go to his farm now, any day of the year, you can just pick whatever you want. You want a tomato, you want chilies, you want greens, you want whatever fruits. It is truly a year-round, rain-fed system. So this is what it looks like. This is the home compound of the chief. He donated this land to us here, and he allowed us to just clear away some of that sorghum. There was a grave, by the way, in this plot. So that was a real big factor of our design, because we didn't want the grave to be in the middle of a swale or in the middle of a garden bed. But so here you can see, these are the footpaths that lead to the nearby homes. And we've just taken stones right across, perpendicular to the trail, all of these stones in order to slow down that water on this footpath coming in and this footpath coming in. And you can see, by the way, this back compound is swept, it's hardscaped, it's compacted from sweeping. And so that picks up a lot of water and speed coming down this footpath. So here is where we're doing the Zuni Bowl, and now that water will enter into this Zuni Bowl, flush around for a minute, and then pour into the swale. So this is where, behind Bishar, my colleague here, that's where the Zuni Bowl was. That flows into this larger upper swale, spreads out. We of course measure the very bottom using an A-frame. That's what this team is doing here, measuring the bottom of the swale. And then here we've pegged out the water line, which is the grass line. So all of this should be on contour. You can check this with the A-frame, these pegs. And then of course the top is a consistent freeboard all the way around. But the point is that water going down that footpath was just leading to the road. Now that water that was destructive, I like to say taking water from floods to food, from destruction to production, landscapes from fragile to fertile. So that water now comes into the swale, fills up, spills through the spillway, and then comes into the lower swale. And here they're digging double dug beds that were deep and filled with so much material. So like I said, this is like a water storage tank with a garden on top. And then we're adding manures, brown materials, green materials, whatever we can get our hands on, bring back that soil. And then you can see these sticks. Every stick represents a line of seeds. So that's how intensively this is planted, because the plants and their roots just have so much fertility deep beneath them. They don't have to elbow each other, and you can plant very, very closely together. Then, of course, we've added the trellises. We're starting here the armoring of the spillway with stones. So here, this is, looks nice and neat with the freeboard all measured out. And I love giant, if your wind situation can handle it, I love having giant trellises, because it's like an outdoor room. You can go in there and, harvest and desilt your upper swale. So here, again, is from another view, here's the big swale, the trellis, some beds. Here's a spillway spilling now into these other beds. And this is just another view of the garden. So it's, it's really designed intentionally, every inch of the whole garden. And you can see how it's just going to swallow and swallow and swallow water. So I also, the presentation was focused on soil and earthworks, but I just can't miss the opportunity to just highlight and celebrate the resilience of South Sudanese people. It's a joke that I'm there as a white lady teaching resilience to people who, if I were for one day in the shoes of this woman named Yaber, who is the most resilient human being that I know. I mean, I would die in one day in her shoes. And so the resilience that I also learned in doing these trainings from the community, I always say that we're all teachers, we're all students, and we're co-engineering, we're co-solutionizing. So it's been a great experience working with the community. And like I said, I've been working in South Sudan for 17 years, and I always learn something every time I go. But anyway, this is the end of the presentation. Thanks everyone for listening, and I hope that we were able to illustrate different approaches. Again, we're not promising. Some of these things are in pilot phase, they're laboratorial. But we're going to test and see, what sticks and what people like and what their preferences are, and then see what we scale and where and how. So thanks, Morag, and everyone for your time. And that's the end of the presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Natalie. You can see by the amount of leaning in and note taking that the richness of the content. And thank you. Absolutely. There were so many threads in there that I think we can take. And as I think Barbara mentioned in the chat, that, we can be applying this in urban areas as well. It's the lens that we can apply to any landscape. And like you're saying all the time, it's about how do you find what's local and to adapt things locally and be co-creating and co-designing all the time. It's not about taking a set of strategies and going plonk over here. It's actually taking that lens of resilience and like, I love what you said about walking the water. Yeah, Luke, nice. Yeah,
that's something that Warren and Brad Lancaster say a lot. Start as high up as you can go in your system or sphere of influence, and just, I'm the first one when it starts raining and people run inside. I'm out there like, no, where's the water moving? How's it behaving? And that's what we need to do.
Yeah. So I would love to invite anyone who'd like to ask a question to pop your hand up. Now, down below, there's a little reactions button on your Zoom, and you can raise your hand like this. It'll bump you up into the top corner so we can kind of see who wants to ask a question. If your system's not working like that, feel free to just kind of wave at us and we'll find you. I also did want to acknowledge that we have completed our hour with this brilliant presentation. So feel free, if you need to go, but I totally encourage you to stay on and be part of this conversation too. So I just wanted to give you that out then if you needed to duck out for any reason or other. With that, I'm going to hand over to Peter. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Maura, and thank you for the wonderful presentation about all the awesome work you're doing in Africa, in Sudan. I was wondering, you were talking about the Chinampas and that you use stakes to make sure the soil doesn't erode away. And I believe that in the original Chinampas, they use living stakes. So they then you can have these stakes growing out to be full-grown trees, and they can shade the Chinampas as well. And I was wondering why you didn't use that in the Chinampas that you made.
We did. So we have planted, the soil is it's going to melt in the rains, and we know that. And so we're just trying to see, we're trying to stack functions and do both. So we did use in the first prototype, those timbers just to protect the outside, but we also have planted guava trees, and well, bananas are not a deep root thing, but they will be planting more around the whole edge to stabilize from at least the outer perimeter. So the trees that we had on hand at the moment were guavas. We're also looking at bamboo, but also the deeper rooted ones for at least the corners and the edges of the beds. So yeah, so we are trying, but it's also a matter of what's available and the tree seedlings. So they're still being delivered. But absolutely, the Aztecs used a different they used willows, they used different trees to that were water loving, and so we also talked about doing neem trees and mango trees. So yeah, well, we are in the process of integrating more tree systems around the edges.
Yeah, I think it is absolutely amazing too, this idea of that playfulness and designing that's happening out there, just really trying everything and coming up with the ideas. It's incredible. Christopher, I know you had a question, you waved. Did you want to open your mic?
Yeah, in regards to the extreme weather, in regards where you've got an extreme dry and an extreme wet, I was just curious, considering the soil composition seems to be like hard pan clay, even when you dig down to do a double dig. It's like an upside down hugelkultur in a sense. What is the existing hydrology aquifer area in that area where you are doing your project? Because I'm quite curious, considering a lot of the water seems to be just running off or evaporating, minimal storage except for what you're doing there, but what is the existing aquifer area?
Well, so the water table is not high, it's a high water table. So you can access water if you go down, but it depends on the angle in which you're asking the question, because, culturally, the people in this community, Nuer, are agro-pastoralist. So they do grain crops, rain-fed grain crops, and pastoralism and holding of livestock, especially cattle and shoats, sheep and goats. So the concept of irrigation, like, to be honest, even just scooping water from the flood area on the other side of the dike and just taking it to your trees, which is a few feet away, is a struggle for some people. First of all, there's a lot of vulnerability and trauma, and these are people in a conflict situation who've been at war for 50 years. So when you're talking about accessing the groundwater system for any type of irrigation, that's a whole nother conversation. What my focus is just like, how can people just create a system, situation of fertile soils, moisture conservation, soil conservation. But we are working with the team, to continue to build on whatever successes we have. So what people, what feels right to people, what people are able to take up and go from there. But the water table is not, it's a high water table because it's beneath the surface, and that's why, again, it's a very mineral rich area. Fossil fuels, conflict, war, Chinese, US. I mean, we can workshop that out a lot.
So in regards to the Chinampa, the Aztec version, which is like the living pre-post, basically what you're creating is like a large wicking bed area, using the different techniques you're using, the smiley face berms, to catch, slow, spread, and store the rain. So you are creating a wicking effect. So therefore your water table is going to be higher. So that's advantageous because it's not running off, it's staying there. So you reduce the transvaporation effect as well by growing green manure crops or mulching.
In the area where we made the Chinampas, the reason that we made them as high as we did is because with the feedback from the community, they said that in the highest point, there will be a 1 meter water level, like that whole place will be inundated. So that's why we only dug the moat 1 meter deep, because there's safety issues of animals and children, and not knowing that there's a deeper space just around the bed. So you know, so that area will become totally flooded, and the point is to just have some elevated food system above the water. I'm sure that somebody's going to ask about bridges or footbridges. Everyone's like, why didn't you build a footbridge? Because the community didn't want one. They're like, that's drama. We just climb up and it's fine. So they're very tall people. I don't know if you know about Dinka and Nuer, but anyway, so that system will become flooded, and they just are okay to just climb up and garden on top. And then you mentioned something about hugelculture. So as I said, the double dug bed in this clay situation is very possibly going to become anaerobic, right? Because if all that water is being held, and so that's why we're testing, we want to, but at the same time, there's a major dry season. So we're testing the double dug beds and see what happens, but we also are working
like the gradient.
Yeah.
On a gradient,
Yeah,
so it
mountain
doesn't
system.
drain out.
Yeah.
An area where you want to create a marsh, maybe in the end.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christopher. I'm going to hand over to Lizzie. She's asked in the chat if you could talk a little bit more about the fish and the opportunity for growing more from the fish. You know, you showed the pictures of all the fish going on the garden, and you talked about fermenting, I suppose. Unless Lizzie wants to speak to that more. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Lizzie?
Yeah, sorry, I can't put my picture on at the moment, but yeah, just aquaculture and the dietary, you know, cultures of the people.
Yeah, so it's a major fishing community. There's an abundance of fish, even when if it's not flooded, there are rivers. And so fish is a main staple for the community here. We also have mudfish, which is this like Darwinian thing that is can live in and out of the water. And so you'll see that a lot in the pools of mud, like even really thick, like pretty dried up mud, like you open it and there's a fish in there. So aquaculture, a formalized system of aquaculture, I don't think would be appropriate here just because there's fish everywhere. But the waste is often just discarded, which creates some Disneyland of disease and flies and all of that drama. But instead, what we can do is take the fish waste or slaughter waste also of animals and ferment it. You know, the communities that we were working with here, they have their own, just like all other communities, because agriculture started for beer, have our own way of fermenting and creating a local brew. And so you just do that with fish, and that can create a very, you know, nutrient-rich probiotic biofertilizer. And so I would look at fish hydrolysates. I think you can look up Korean natural farming. There are ways that you can do different types of ferments with natural products that are protein-rich or nitrogen-rich. So yeah, there's huge opportunity, and the community totally got it. When at first they're like, "What, you want to put fish here?" And one guy, Simon, he said, "Yes, because I know what's going to happen. The insects are going to come and they're going to start, you know, digging the soil and softening the soil." And so he was explaining to people why are we doing this? And so it's just such an easy thing. That's the part of the circularity that we talk about. How do we take waste streams and how do we recover? Don't even say waste. How do we recover streams of resources in the community, convert those into value streams so that whatever these products are, organic materials and waste and human manure and whatever, can have a second, you know, go on the merry-go-round of the biological economy of that space.
Fantastic. I think there's a lot to learn in that space, and maybe, you know, in the permaculture educators program, many of you were part of that. We could have a bit of an exploration of that whole thread a lot more. I think that would be a really exciting topic to dive into. There is a comment here from Echo Echidna. Now, I don't know what your real name is. That might be your real name, but if not, Echo Echidna said, would round beds be more stable than rectangles? So I'm assuming you're talking about the Chinampas.
Maybe. I mean, it's very possible. We haven't tested that yet, but I would encourage you to test and see. I mean, I can see how that might make sense, but one thing for sure is we are going to have a massive amount of torrential rain in South Sudan. If you don't know about the rains in South Sudan, remember in Forrest Gump when he was in Vietnam and he says sometimes it even rains from bottom up. Like it's just sheeting down and flooding. And I mean, I lived in a tent for 2 years on the Nile River, and it would just make you crazy when it was raining because it was so loud. It was a complete assault. So, I mean, I think at some point, whether it's round or rectangular or heart-shaped or whatever, there's going to be erosion. And for me, the issue is at the base, you know, how we treat the base. So what we've started doing is beveling it so that the water isn't directly on a straight up and down wall. But yeah, I mean, it's physics, it's gravity. So I would encourage you to test different styles, and you know, maybe I'll suggest that to the team as well. I think from a space efficiency standpoint, like that's why humans are like into like gridded rectilinear things. And also I did ask, I would love for the UN to come in with some of those excavators and throw us a bone, you know, like, can we just have 2 hours of an excavator, you carve up this whole place and dig, and then we can do the finishing, you know, the finishing aspects of the bed. So we'll see. There is interest. There, a lot of people are really interested in what we're doing there, USAID, UN. So it's a learning for everybody.
Yeah.
And I'm just posting my LinkedIn profile, which I post a lot of stuff that I work on, and presentations or photos or articles and things. So that's a good place to kind of know what I'm working on.
Yeah, thank you. And there's always absolutely fantastic things that Natalie's not only working on, but that she shares regularly through that, you know, really fascinating reports or projects or work that other people are doing. Natalie's a consummate sharer of great stuff. And so definitely worth keeping track of whatever she's sharing. I want to ask if there's anyone else who'd like to ask Natalie a question while we still have her here.
What are A-frames? A-frames are survey tools which can be made of local materials, including sticks and twigs, and you calibrate them so that you know the exact center point, and then you can use that to find the elevation lines of the land, which are perpendicular to the flow of water. So, you know, water, what we're trying to do in permaculture is slow water down, spread it out, and sink into the ground. The opposite of that, what's the opposite of slow, spread, sink? Fast, incisive, superficial. So we don't want water just to be zipping through and carrying nutrient out of the system. We want it to soak into the ground. And so we use that A-frame tool to survey the natural patterns of the land so that we can respond to that with our design. And if I can just say, I'm not a huge fan of mandala gardens. It's great if you're doing like a healing garden for a hospital with butterflies and stuff, but you're actually, when you do that, you're imposing an artificial pattern on the land, which can be a beautification element, but generally we want to use A-frames or laser levels or dumpy levels or eye levels, whatever, to find the natural pattern of the land so we understand how water, nutrient, and wild energies are flowing through and influencing the land, and then respond to that pattern. So that's what we use A-frames for.
Thank you. And I love that what you just said about those designs. You know, there's quite iconic designs that get attached to what permaculture is. But it was just an example of something in a certain place where it worked. It might have been a flat garden, for example, and it was designed for having a central sprinkler, and that made sense in that context. So I think it's always about the context. It's always about the slope. It's always, like you're saying, about gravity. How can we slow spread, sink and store as much water? And I love the language that you'll bring into this, Natalie, you know, about the sponging and all the little quotes, like, you know, those sort of things, like, you know, from floods to food, from fragile to fertile. There's another one that you stuck in there. Like, there's such good little kind of
destruction to production.
Yeah. What was the other one? Sorry.
From destruction to production.
Destruction for production. Yes. Perfect.
Yeah. And you said the key word, Morag, which is principles. You know, in permaculture, we don't apply designs, we apply principles. And there should be the same principles that nature uses. We're not trying to mimic nature, we're trying to mimic her principles, you know, and so then that's the toolkit that we use wherever we go, to now tailor and craft that design to that specific context.
So I'm going to hand over to Reb. Christopher, I know you had your hand up first, but because you've had a go already, I'm just going to hand to Reb. Go ahead.
Hopefully just a quick one. I have the benefit of having a piece of land in rural South Australia, which is largely on a hill. And then there's a creek that runs at the bottom, at the base of the hill. I only have control over a portion of that hill. But I'm wondering about where my efforts are best served, and should I start trying to slow the water as it comes down the hill? This hill is very well vegetated. There's trees and some lower level bushes, but the water definitely comes down the hill into that creek and straight off the property. So are my efforts best to slow it as it's coming down the hill, or should I not worry so much about that and try to slow it as it's on the flat land?
Oh, no. Okay, so when you take a shower, where do you start drying your body? Is it the head, the belly, or the feet? So this is why I always say, bald men are okay, bald mountains are not. On your hill, on your system, first of all, I would look at what's around, because farms should have arms. And that means we always talk about stormwater runoff, which is the water leaving your land. We don't talk enough about stormwater run on. How do we grow arms on our farms and reach out to the road, the culvert, the gully that's passing nearby, and bring that water into your farm? I would absolutely start at the very top. If you have trees, and maybe you don't have excavators and $1 million budgets like NGOs, but you can, even using stones around the existing trees, give all the trees a big haircut. If you know what FMNR is, farmer managed natural regeneration, coppicing and pollarding as appropriate to the trees. Let that organic, give them all a big haircut, let all that material fall on the ground, create, even if it's with stones, if you don't have labor or machines, just using a line of stones to do a half moon around the tree. Obviously, the open part of the circle should be facing uphill so water can enter inside. I've literally trained civil engineers, and then I saw the upside down stuff that they did, where the berm is above the swale uphill. Anyway, so yeah, gravity. You have to understand about gravity. Things flow downhill, and we design accordingly. But absolutely start at the very, very top as much as you can, even if that's applying more organic matter. Get a bunch of friends and urinate all over the top of the mountain. That's what I want to say. I said it. Just, applying, building healthy living soils with natural nitrogen, human manure, organic matter. If you can do your earthworks, absolutely. But the more you catch up in the top of your system, the more you're going to create this underground lens or sub irrigation. Water always is going to flow downhill. We want that to happen under the soil, not on top of the soil. So by the way, when you start on the top of the hill, where you have that key point, where the hill goes from convex to concave, that transition point is where you can have spring lines rejuvenated or come out. And in mountains, just like human, when we consume a lot of liquids, it's got to come out somewhere. And for mountains, that happens at the key point, at that spring line. So I would, start at the top as much as you can. If there is a road that you can harvest water off of, follow David Spicer, Brad Lancaster, Warren Brush, Jeff Lawton. Who are the women who are doing earthworks? Jesus. I don't know, Morag, Lisa Mollison is a massive excavator operator and earthworks person. I don't know, I think we need to do a women's earthworks course, something. But follow people, humans, mammals, who do these things, and especially great examples of harvesting water onto your land. That's a missed opportunity of so many.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, I was having a chat to some farmers recently on some degraded land around Canberra, and what they're doing is taking the cows away from the river, so the river becomes a protected space, and then they're taking the watering spot for the cows up to the top of the hill. And the idea normally is to have things on contour, and I was asking, well, why have you got these runs going from the river to the top? He's saying so we can have cows walking up to the top, and then their manure and everything coming down, but we move them across the hill really regularly. So we're constantly taking up the nutrients and the water up to the top. So it was a really interesting strategy, using the same thing and then, trying to store that up there. Before I go to you, there's a very quick question from, I can't remember who it's from, but it's asking, whereabouts do you plant the trees in the smiles? Do you put them in the middle or do you put them on the smile?
Okay, so okay, well, so basically you have the smile and we make a hole in the center, but there's a deep part. This is difficult. I have clay, I'm modeling clay, but basically it depends. Like everything else, you know, permaculture's middle name is it depends. So if you're in a very dry land area, plant deep into that dimple inside the reservoir, because it's a dry land area and that's where you have the greatest concentration of moisture. If you're in a wetter area and you don't want that tree to be directly in the wettest point, so that smile berm is a little guild, and you just like a herb spiral, things that like to be dry can go on top of the berm. You know, oftentimes what we do is we'll plant a long-term overstory tree in the center of the hole, but because we're planting in time and space, inside the dimple, we can also plant bananas and papayas because those are not going to be there that long, but at the same time, they add shade and protection for the long-term tree. So we blend accordingly. And we also plant trees way closer together than people presume. So normally in the trainings, we'll do like 4 meters between trees, but we'll put like a little tree, you know, like a lemon tree and a big, you know, we are planting in time and space within that triangulation as well. So I have a triangle, 4 meters, 4 meters, 4 meters, a big thing, a medium thing, a smaller thing, and then lots of little, you know, crawling things and binding things in between. But it depends on your context. And I think I have a YouTube channel called Natalie Topa where I'm trying to upload a lot of different videos that I used to just post on Facebook, but because there's Facebook drama and I'm always in Facebook jail. So I decided to park my videos on YouTube. I don't know if there's YouTube jail.
So Natalie, all of the different links, the books, the people, the YouTube channels, everything, that I will make sure that this goes into an email with a recording. So if you want to send me anything that you've mentioned that you think is really important to add in, then I can send that out so no one has to worry about whether they missed that or not. I'm going to hand the last question over to Christopher. Thank you.
Here we go. In regards to what you're creating is a wonderful food oasis amongst this arid area. The issue is, from a social point of view, is I know people go in and assume that they people have needs, but you are focused on what the individual community needs are first and foremost. But in regards to what you're growing, the increased biodiversity would also be healthy for the community in regards to the diversification and improvement of their overall diet, where it comes down to food sovereignty, food safety, food security, the hunger factor. Correct?
Is that a question or a comment?
I mean, I'm asking it, do you focus on that in regards to their food safety, food security aspects of it, according to their diet, or introducing more other elements?
1000%. As Morag mentioned, I've gone 3 times to India to study with Dr. Vandana Shiva. One major drum that I bang is the issue of seed sovereignty and protecting people from seed slavery. So number one, heritage security for me through food systems is a very important thing. Indigenous foods, the local cultural indigenous species and the seed saving of those. In Yemen, we're doing Quranic seed nurseries, right? So things that are mentioned in the Quran, which historically have been part of Yemeni food culture and heritage, we're bringing those out of hibernation through the seeds. So absolutely 1000%. Local indigenous agro-biodiversity is the only way to create food security, because you can, and this is something for hopefully USAID and UN and everybody's listening right now. You cannot create a regenerative system with degenerative seeds. That's a fake thing. That's fake news. That's like Donald Trump permaculture or something. I don't know. But so, you know, you can't, the point of GMOs, I'm going to be really clear about this. So if I offend somebody, for sure, I'm going back to Facebook jail. If you are promoting GMOs, improved seeds, hybrid seeds, and I'm not talking about I'm not talking about people for thousands of years who've been locally adapting and locally improving foods. That's not what I'm saying. When corporations, for the purposes of their profit, are meddling with seeds in such a way that people cannot reproduce, adapt them, continue with that lineage of that seed for the rest of eternity, then that is a problem. And you are
That is a
actively
big
trying
problem,
to usher people into seed slavery, and you cannot have food sovereignty without seed sovereignty. So if there's any question about how I feel about this topic, you need to
I get it. I get it. The issue is in regards to seed sovereignty is like you see, particularly like they did in Sri Lanka. All of a sudden, the government told everyone, all the farmers in the country, tomorrow you're going to be organic. No introduction phase, nothing, no education. Then they wonder why there's such a food shortage in that situation. There's a right way and a wrong way of doing it. They've done it well in India, in quite a few provinces and districts in India, in regards to transitioning into organic or natural agricultural practices, utilizing traditional knowledge and LORE law. In Vietnam, where I've lived for the last 12, 15 years, the term is called Vun Ao Chung, which is, it's a closed loop system where you've got the land, you've got the house, you've got the livestock, you've got the garden, you've got the pond.
Sure. And there are many agencies now, they're like, oh, we love regenerative agriculture, but we also want to do seed inputs and connect people with market inputs for seeds. And I'm like, that's not regenerative then. Okay, that is not regenerative. So, you know, my response always, if the technology is so great and if the technology helps people to be so resilient, why are you not educating farmers to do it locally? Wouldn't that make the most sense?
That would make a lot more sense. So like, and more have a, like small satellite areas of seed savers where the natural hybridization or natural heirloom occur. Focus, I mean, that do well in that microclimate or in that particular bioregion or biome. That
Absolutely.
And thank
you.
And, you know,
there's no profit in it for the big companies,
for sure.
Thank
I mean,
you,
I'm a big
I think
proponent of, you know, Dr. Shiva is a follower of Gandhi and civil disobedience, and she promotes something that I sub-promote, which is seed satyagraha, which is civil disobedience. If the government or corporations are telling you not to save seeds, save all the seeds. Give them out, pass them out, distribute them. Not, I mean, and I say that in an ecologically responsible way. You don't want to come and do invasive, ecologically irresponsible things, but you're, you know, in terms of food and squash, you know, don't forget 94% of our global crop varieties have gone extinct because of petrochemical companies and corrupt governments and all of these machinery around seed and petrochemical, you know, chemical warfare farming. We remain only with 6% of our global crop varieties. And they're talking about that's food security, that's better yields. Come on. Anyway, I'll end on that
topic. I think that's a really good place to end, and it's kind of a really huge call to action as well, to be focusing on seed sovereignty wherever we are, whatever we're doing at whatever scale we're in. This is something that we can do. And also, I think, to really take on any of the ideas that Natalie has been talking about throughout this whole session, about how we can create sponges in our backyard, because it brings our whole systems to life. And then we have seed that is viable and is alive that we can save and share as well. So I just want to extend an absolutely enormous thank you to you, Natalie, for taking the time here today. It's the comments have just been flowing through saying, thank you, inspirational. You thank you for being in this world, Natalie. You're such a gift to the world, like so much gushing of beautiful comments there. So yeah, really thank you, Natalie. And I look forward to when we can actually have conversation in person again.
Yes.
Yeah.
We need a new video, a new apartment.
I do. So I just wanted to let you all know that this presentation and the Q&A session will be edited and sent out to you very soon. And also we'll send out all the notes that of the different key points and references that Natalie has talked about, and how to follow her on LinkedIn as well. Thank you everyone for being here. I know we have people from all around the world here participating in this, and there's a whole lot of people who also booked in that were from a time zone that didn't suit them. So they'll be watching this afterwards. So hello to all of you who are watching this as a recording. And Again, thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everyone. It's been really great to have your company here today.